According to Webster's dictionary, poetry is writing that formulates a concentrated, imaginative awareness to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm.
My family never finished migrating, we just stopped. We invented cactus. To survive the winters, we created steel. At my dad's mill, I saw a man dressed like a Martian walk straight into fire. The flames licked his skin, but like a pet, it never bit him. In the desert, they find our baseball caps, our empty water bottles, but never our bodies. Even the best ICE agents can't track us through the storms. But I have a theory. Some of our cousins don't care about LA or Chicago. They build a sanctuary underneath the sand, under the skin we shed, so we can wear the desert like a cobija, under the bones of our loved ones, bones worn thin as thorns to terrorize blue agents, bones worn thin as guitar strings, so when the wind blows, we can follow the music home.
That was José Olivarez, offering meaning, sound, and rhythm as he read his poem, My Family Never Finished Migrating, We Just Stopped, from his debut collection, Citizen Illegal. From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nirani.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
It's hard to believe, but I am often at a loss for words. Well, it's not that hard to believe that very few of my words make any sense. But, in any case, when I get stuck, when I need a different context, when I want a sense of perspective, I flip open a small collection of poems by Langston Hughes that has been on my desk for years. Every time, his words, his stories, his sense of justice not just pull me out of the grammatical rabbit hole of the moment, but give me a sense of what is right and what is wrong. It clarifies things for me. These days, for poets who are immigrants or children of immigrants, words are an incredibly powerful tool. These talented artists are offering their audiences powerful pictures of their journey and their new home. One remarkable example that I heard of was Sarah Abu Rashed, a 19-year-old artist and poet. Her family originates from Haifa, Palestine, but she was born and raised in Damascus, Syria. In 2013, she moved with her family to Ohio due to the Syrian war, and that's when she started writing poetry in English. In 2017, she recited her poem, I Am America, at the Greater Columbus Arts Council's 2017 Partnership Awards.
I am America. I am the voice, the face, the body of America. I am America, for I am different. For I know and feel and see and hear and love and accept and defend and embrace my differences. I am America, for I don't want to be like everyone else, for everyone else is not even like everyone else.
All of which brings me to my guest this week, José Olivarez. Born and raised in Chicago, the eldest son of once undocumented parents, José is out with his debut collection of poems, Citizen Illegal. José's poetry touches on family, cultural touchstones, and of course, immigration. His work is deeply introspective, but incredibly accessible. After reading his book, I was incredibly excited for this conversation, and as you can probably tell, it was a conversation that could have gone on for hours. José is a graduate of Harvard University. He's taught poetry workshops and performed in venues across the country. Citizen Illegal was awarded the 2018 Chicago Review of Books Poetry Prize, and it was named a top book of 2018 by NPR and the New York Public Library. I spoke with José in New York City, where he recently moved. We talked about his introduction to poetry, his mom's love, his visits to Mexico, and, of course, we talked about Vicks Vapor Rub.
So my name is José Olivarez. I am a poet, I'm an educator, I'm a performer. I was born in the city of Chicago, raised in Calumet City, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and I live in New York City currently.
How did your family get to Chicago and Calumet?
My dad and my mom are both from Cañadas de Obregón, which is a small village in Jalisco, Mexico. And my dad was back and forth between the United States and Mexico for a number of years, doing a bunch of different jobs. He was a migrant farm worker at times. He worked at a circus for a little bit. And then he got word that there were permanent jobs in Chicago in the steel mills. So that's when he went back to Mexico, married my mom, and then together they crossed the border in the trunk of a car and made their way to the city of Chicago, where me and my brothers were born.
Do they share with you that experience?
They've shared with me bits and pieces. They would rather not talk about it. Whenever we ask, they want to know why we're asking about that stuff. They would kind of rather leave that part behind them and concentrate on where we're at now and what we're up to now.
Yeah, I find the same thing with my parents. They'll talk about it, but it takes a while. You have to kind of chip away. And like the same thing, my grandfather, it was towards the end of his time before he really started talking about it.
Yeah, and so with my parents, I think that's something that I try each time that I talk to them to get a little bit more of the story and to talk to them more and more. Because I don't know, I feel like in moving to the United States, there was like almost an erasure of this part of their lives. And for me, I'm really interested in knowing who my parents were when they met each other, who they were when they decided to make this journey, right? That's like a big decision, I imagine.
So what led you to poetry?
That's a good question. When I was a teenager, poetry was the last thing on my mind for a long time. Ultimately, what led me to poetry was just that poetry was the art form where I was given permission to tell my own story and to investigate my own life. So I was always reading a ton of books, but it seemed like the majority of the writers that we were studying were white and either from nobility or they had passed away a long time ago. I just had no idea that people were allowed to tell their own stories until I saw poetry for the first time, until I had the experience of like watching teenagers perform poems about their lives. And for me, that's when it clicked. I can also write about my family and I can write about my neighborhood and maybe people will listen.
Is poetry a way for you to tell your parents' story?
For me, I can't tell their story in part because all of the silences that exist, right?
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot that I want to say to my parents and a lot that I want to know from them, a lot that I want them to say to me. But because there's like this distance in our relationship, which is not to say that we're not tight, but there's unsayable things between us. And so poetry is a way to try and say those things, for me to attempt to make that reach out to them and to also imagine what they might say back to me. Hopefully we get to a place in our relationship where we can be totally free and open with one another. But if not, I can still kind of reach for that in the poems and hope that also then makes open our relationship more.
One of the poems that you wrote was, "My mom texts me for the millionth time."
Yeah.
It popped out to me.
Yeah, I'll read it and then we can talk about it. My mom texts me for the millionth time. The phone vibrates. My mom buzzes my desk. Her love reaches me wherever I am, which is usually unavailable. My mom home with my family, minus me, might as well be my name. It's our family's second house in Calumet City after the first was lost to anachronisms. You can find my mom on the couch, her shoes off, her bare feet throb with her American ache. Her work will wake her in a few hours to frame a store. My mom's work is turning sanitary into pristine, but you already know my mom's work by its invisibility. My mom shopping with you, watching you spill Mountain Dew on her floors. My job takes me away from home, so I can build a bridge back to the living room, where my mom rests her feet, awash in the glow she makes so effortless, it's impossible to tell the light comes from her own body. So in this poem, I think something that I'm kind of always grappling with is how, in order to build the life that I want, in order to live the life that I love most, it takes me away from my family constantly, I went to school at Harvard University, and so I left my family to go to college, and then I left to find work in New York, and I moved back, and now I'm leaving again, and my work is kind of constantly pulling me away, and at the same time, it's what allows me to build that bridge back, is again what I'm hoping for, right? Like I'm trying to reconnect.
What I took away from this is that it wasn't that you were texting your mom for the millionth time, as she was texting you. So she was, reaching out, right? And, in some ways you don't even say that explicitly in the poem, but you say it explicitly in the title. The text was you reaching out, but the headline was, okay, she's trying to find me.
Yeah. And she always is. Yeah. And she's, it always kind of stuns me. Like every time I'm in need of like a kind word or something, my mom texts me and asks me how I am. And yeah, so absolutely, yeah. My mom, you're right, my mom is trying to find me in the poem. And the poem is me trying to find her back. And so I'm picturing where she's at in that moment.
So she read this?
So my mom only speaks and reads and writes in Spanish.
Uh-huh.
So, my mom has the book, and I've told her about the book, and my mom knows that there's poems about her, but she hasn't necessarily read the poems word for word.
Uh-huh. What do you think a reaction would be to this?
I think my mom is always very proud of my work as a writer. Mm-hmm. I think also she'd probably get a little bit embarrassed, I think I get some of my shyness from her, so, my mom would be a little bit shy that there are poems about her in the world.
Mm-hmm. What does your dad think about your work?
My dad is also a big supporter of my work. Mm-hmm. Again, our relationship is not the most emotionally communicative.
I'm South Asian. I have the same.
Yeah, so my dad shows me he loves me because he provides for our family. You know what I mean?
Right.
So my dad supports me. He shows up and he comes to the readings, but we haven't had yet a ton of conversations about the poems. That's something that I'm hoping for, that we'll be able to talk more and more.
It's a process, right? Mm-hmm. It's a process.
Yeah.
The other one I wanted to talk about a little bit, and kind of goes back to the journey question, is my family never finished migrating, we just stopped.
All right, so I'll read this one, then we can talk about it. My family never finished migrating, we just stopped. We invented cactus. To survive the winters, we created steel. At my dad's mill, I saw a man dressed like a Martian walk straight into fire. The flames licked his skin, but like a pet, it never bit him. In the desert, they find our baseball caps, our empty water bottles, but never our bodies. Even the best ICE agents can't track us through the storms. But I have a theory. Some of our cousins don't care about LA or Chicago. They build a sanctuary underneath the sand, under the skin we shed, so we can wear the desert like a cobija, under the bones of our loved ones, bones worn thin as thorns to terrorize blue agents, bones worn thin as guitar strings, so when the wind blows, we can follow the music home. So this one, the origin kind of was a different place than where the poem ultimately went. What I was thinking about was this argument that you sometimes hear people on the right make, where they say well, if America is such a terrible place, then why is everyone rushing to get here, right? And when I wrote the title, it was trying to articulate this idea that my family didn't come to this country because of some innate American superiority to the rest of the world. My family will continue to migrate until we find the place where we are safe, until we find the place where we can be home and take care of each other and not be threatened, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that America is the ultimate endpoint. And our journey is not to any one country, right? Our journey is to this place, like I said, where we can be safe and whole. And I was thinking about all of the stories about Juan Does that you read about and Juanita Does. Basically, these are people who die crossing the desert in the United States, and by the time that their bodies are found, they've decomposed a lot of times so much that they're unidentifiable. There's no records of who they are, and all we have left of them are these very small artifacts. And so that's why they're called Juan Doe or Juanita Doe, because they're unidentified, right? And so I was thinking about these stories and trying to find a way to imagine a different ending to that, right? So maybe instead of vanishing into death, maybe they found this place where we're migrating towards, and it's underneath the sand, and it's a place where it's safe from, whatever people might threaten us.
When I read it, that's what popped in my mind, is the Juanita Dos. Over the weekend, I was in Nogales, and I crossed, and I was walking around the Sonora side, and it brings it all into stark relief. And that's a city or town environment, but you get a very clear sense of why people are migrating.
Yeah, and again, that's something that I think about a lot, is migration is natural. It's something that so many of us do within the United States for a variety of reasons. I moved from, Calumet City to Cambridge in order to go to college. Migration is a natural thing that we do when we get an opportunity. When we have to, we find ways to do it and continue to.
Yeah. You teach poetry now.
Yeah.
So what's that like?
Teaching poetry is one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
I love, in a poetry workshop, part of the work is facilitating the writing of poems, but part of the work is taking a look at master texts and reading them together and kind of identifying the moves the writer is making. And I think about poetry the way that I think about magic, in that the work is trying to transform ordinary objects. You take, the ordinary material of your life and you try to transform it into something else so that you can reveal something deeper about what it means to be human, about our relationships with one another, about our relationships to work and the planet, and so on. So for me, getting to see people who are beginning to write, see that happen in a poem, and then begin to think about where that magic is for themselves, that's like one of my favorite things, to see them do that. And then to hear them speak it and articulate it.
And do you feel like for you as a poet, the ordinary, if you will, to use your term, is, the immigrant experience, the migrant experience? Is that part of it?
I think that's definitely part of it. I think so many of the poems in my book are reaching towards my parents, because that's kind of the unsayable, right? For me right now. If I could say it easily, then I would. But one of the things that I can articulate is the debt that I have to my parents.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I think about, right, is when I was 16, I went back to Mexico for a month. And my secret plan was kind of to go to Mexico and stay, because, in my experience in public schools in the United States, I was like, I don't belong here, but if I could just go back, then I would find where I belong and my life would make sense. But of course, I went back to Mexico and they were like, who are you, right? Like, they're like, you're not one of us. You're from El Norte or whatever. Yeah. And so sometimes it feels like I was kind of cheated out of an experience back in my parents' hometown, and other times it feels differently. So there's all of these things that are kind of constantly shaping how I see the world, how I interact with the world. So that's kind of what I'm trying to illustrate in the poems.
I sensed a lot of hope, fear, frustration, but rarely did I sense a lot of anger. Is that true?
I think that is true. And so this is another thing that kind of happened in the process of crafting the book, right? Was the first manuscript was a lot more angry and sorrowful than what ended up becoming the book. And the reason for that is I have 3 younger brothers. I want to make sure that when they read it, they knew that I didn't just see the parts of us that are sad or angry or, kind of troubled, that I also saw how funny we are. The book is dedicated to my 3 younger brothers, and it's because, for better and sometimes for worse, like, there's nothing that they won't make fun of. Like, someone could be sick and hurting, and my brothers will still find a way to make them laugh. Like, they are always cracking jokes. And I wanted the book to reflect that. I don't think about being Mexican or being the son of Mexican immigrants as a burden. I'm not sad about that. I wake up happy and grateful for my experience.
But you don't romanticize the experience either. I mean, it comes across right in the title of the book, right? Citizen Illegal.
Yeah. I did that on purpose, because one, I understood that there were going to be people who would see the title, who would see my name, and immediately already project a certain story onto the book. I didn't need to then amplify that story. I could kind of play with those expectations to write a story that's funnier, to write a story that's not romanticized.
So, one funny small bit, Vapor Rub.
Yes.
I'll let you read it, and then we can have an entire 4-hour conversation around Vic's Vapor Rub.
So this poem is called Note Vaporu. Vaporu is pronounced Vaporu, like loud or chew. The label for Vaporu says it's for cough suppression, but in my house, Vaporu is for headaches, sore muscles, nightmares, and everything else. Put some Vaporu on my dad's diabetic toes and watch the sugar evaporate. Miss a day of church? Put some Vaporu on your forehead and watch forgiveness flush your cheeks. Put some Vaporu on our bank account and watch the bill collector stop calling. When I forget a word in Spanish, take a teaspoon of Vaporu under the tongue.
Every immigrant household, I think, has the Vaporu or Vapor Rub.
Yeah. That's been one of the cool experiences, is that I thought that was like a specifically Mexican thing. I didn't know that it translated across a bunch of different cultures. So that's been cool. To this day, whenever I tell my mom that I'm sick, she's like, "Mijo, go buy some Vaporu. You already know. That's how you take care of it." This stuff is great.
It is magic.
Yeah,
I mean,
it works.
It works for everything.
Yeah.
Our recurring title of poems throughout the book is Mexican Heaven.
Yeah.
And I'll ask you to read whichever one is your favorite one. Mm-hmm. But what I liked about it is that each one had the same title, but kind of a different message.
Yeah.
Right? Which one was your favorite?
So Mexican Heaven I originally wrote as one long poem with different parts. Uh-huh. And I split it up for the book because it was my favorite poem in the book. And I didn't want to put it at the end, because then what if people never got to the end and then they missed my favorite poem? And I didn't want to put it at the beginning, because then, they read the first poem and I mean, I really love the book, but then they never come back to that poem, right? So what I wanted was to set it up so that no matter where you were in the book, you were always coming back to Mexican Heaven.
As I was reading it, I was like, I wonder when the next one is going to come.
Yeah, so I split it up for the book. So in terms of my favorite section, it changes from time to time. I think my favorite one is the Mexican Heaven on page 22. All the Mexican women refuse to cook or clean or raise the kids or pay bills or make the bed or drive you to work or do anything except watch their novelas. So heaven is gross. The rats are fat as roosters, and the men die of starvation.
Why that one?
I like it because one of the things that was on my mind as I was writing the book was the culture of machismo. And so this idea of there being a heaven where, because the women refuse to do all of this work that is kind of expected of them in our households, that heaven is gross and the men die of starvation. I like that flip. I was proud of myself for that one.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to the first one that we talked about, of your mom texting you for the millionth time.
Yeah.
Right? It's got not quite a start, but it's similar theme.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we started, I told you about a conversation I had with Monica Castillo, who's a film critic who has been really looking at the role of immigrants in film. And she had a really interesting perspective on storytelling of the immigrant experience I wanted to get your input on. To paraphrase, she said, so many stories about immigrants are about the journey or the arrival, but not necessarily about the departure and why people leave. So I don't know, I want to get your take on that.
I like that. That sounds true to me. And I think part of it goes back to what we were saying early on in our conversation, where there's a lot of shame about why people depart, right? Yeah. And there's like a lot of pain about why people depart, that, so many of us and so many of our parents, right, when they arrive, that's the triumphant part, right? That hopefully is the beginning of something else. And so I think there's an eagerness to bury what forces people to leave in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Describe to me the cover art.
Yeah, absolutely. So the cover art is by an artist from Phoenix, Arizona, who's now based in Chicago, named Scent Rock. The cover of the book is one of Scent Rock's iconic figures, and a figure that he paints over and over again. It's a person wearing a bird mask. And in this instance, the person wearing the bird mask also has a halo around their head. They're also tattooed. They have the rosary beads. They're carrying a bottle of drink. They're surrounded by imagery that reminds of Chicago and the desert. And there's the Mexican eagle with the snake. So it's all of these images. Scent Rock is an artist that I've admired for a long time. Shout out to Scent Rock. And I knew from the moment that I was writing this book that I wanted to have a Scent Rock cover, because that character that Scent Rock paints feels so on point to kind of what I imagine to be the experience of immigration and the experience of kind of striving in America, right? Like we're ordinary people, but we like try to wear the bird mask and we try to find our paths and we try to like fly and take off as much as we can. And so there's something like very human and very hopeful and something there that has always captured me. So I was really lucky. I gave Scent Rock a bunch of the poems that are in the book, and he created this image specifically for the cover. So this is an original work of art.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And and now we're like good friends, so I'm hopeful that we'll keep collaborating on different projects.
It's a beautiful piece. I got one last question for you.
Go ahead.
Finish this sentence. And, as a poet, you got a lot of pressure here.
Oh,
right?
Lord. See, you could have told me this beforehand.
I'd never tell anybody this.
Okay, go ahead.
But at least I'm building it up. So ask everybody to finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Let me see. Only in America do we celebrate the food and culture of immigrants while incarcerating and seeking to remove immigrants themselves.
Thank you, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
José Olivarez is a poet, master teaching artist, and performer. His debut collection of poems is titled Citizen Illegal. For more information about José, visit our website, immigrationforum.org. And while you're there, you can subscribe to Only in America.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Only in America. The show is produced by Regina Medina and Emily Chow. Our sound editor is Joanna Taylor, and Kathleen Farrell is our executive producer. Thanks for listening. I'm Ali Narani.